Apparently so. Apparently they just don't want to cross the Jordan. Oh. If I had feelings, they might even be hurt. Nah. Oh. Do we have anybody in particular on our prayer list this week? I know we need to add Karen on there, David, please. Karen Lackey. Her name? Go ahead, David. Amen. Thank you. Come on in. So we left off last week with Rahab and the spies returning to Joshua. So we're going to pick up this morning at chapter 3. And let's see, where do I want to start here? What we see here is Joshua prepares to cross the Jordan to fulfill the instructions that he was given by God. And he starts off by addressing the people and giving them some instructions. So let's start at the beginning of chapter 3. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and he and all the sons of Israel set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan, and they lodged there before they crossed. And it came about at the end of 3 days that the officers went through the midst of the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, with the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. However, there shall be between you and it a distance of about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you shall go, for you have not passed this way before." Okay, let's start. Let's get into that a little bit. There was every commentator had something to say about this. Most of them said the same thing. So, does everybody know what a cubit is? Cubit was roughly the measure from here to here, or about 18 inches. So when they talk in terms of 2,000 cubits, it comes out to, I did the math on this. Here we go. About 3,000 feet, or about 3/5 of a mile. A lot of speculation onto why this distance was there. I think there's only one speculation that I don't really agree with, but the two primary ideas were, first, when the Levitical priests in the ark touched the waters and the waters came back, that would have given the people enough distance to have stayed away from there, so that when they came across, they would have walked on dry land. Another assertion by a lot of these guys is that it was to establish this boundary of reverence, which makes a lot of sense as well. And a third one was talking specifically about where they could see their way because they hadn't gone this way before. Okay. If you keep in mind that we're talking about the entire nation of Israel, probably 1 million or so people, that makes a little bit of sense too, in that they would have had enough distance where they weren't crowding on top of it, and everyone as a whole pretty much could see the direction that they were going. The comment, they had not been this way before, why do you think that comment was made? Think about the people. Verse 4, do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. Crossing the Jordan.
So it is a new way that they're going. They have not really been there before. Previously, it was going back and forth and meandering.
Right.
Probably cross where they've been many times.
That was my thought, is that this was clearly to identify that they weren't going to continue to meander back and forth through the wilderness, that this was a specific path that they were going. That was one of my thoughts. There's another thought. And in particular, what would these people have not seen? Parting of the Red Sea, huh? Because none of these people had been part of that miracle. And that's going to be a big thing. When I did you read through and you see some things, and you read a few commentators, and they like to dance on the surface. It took some digging for me to get to where I got on the information that I got here. So when the Levitical priests bring the ark to the edge of the river is pulled back, very, very much like the parting of the Red Sea. What verse is it? It says the water was pulled back to the city of Adam. Verse 16. A great distance away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. Like I said, it took some digging to find out. That was somewhere in the ballpark of 500 miles. So the River Jordan was pulled back 500 miles. So that attests a couple things. One, that it had to have been a miracle of God, although there are commentators that say that archaeological evidence shows that there was a landslide and that's what cut off the Jordan. Yeah, okay. And there was a storm or a wind or whatever, and that's what cut off the Red Sea too, so yeah. The other thing is the large number of people in the Israel nation that was crossing needed some distance, didn't they? So this huge distance is created so that everyone in the world at that time basically would become aware that the Israelites were crossing the Jordan. Now, what did the spies tell us last week about the information that they brought back? They what?
They wouldn't be able to do it.
That's the first set of spies. This is the two spies that went and met Rahab. What information did they bring back? I'm sorry? People were melting in fear. They were dreading the Israelites coming across the Jordan. What better way to announce that than to pull the river back 500 miles and have everybody walk across it on dry land? You don't think they weren't scared to begin with? That'd get my attention. For which? 16. That the waters that were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap a great distance away at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, and those that were flowing down toward the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, were completely cut off, so the people crossed opposite Jericho. So again, it took me a while to find a map that identified that distance between where they believed Jericho was and Zarethan and Adam. I figured it'd be a whole lot easier than it was, but okay. All right, so the Levitical priests come in there, the water's pulled back, they go to the middle of the Jordan and they stop. And then the people of Israel cross the Jordan on dry land. So after the people cross, then what does Joshua tell them to do? Starting in chapter 4. Take for yourselves, in verse 2, take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from each tribe, and command them, saying, take up for yourself 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet are standing firm, and carry them over with you, and lay them down in the lodging place where you will lodge tonight. Okay. So now see this picture. The priests are still in the middle of the Jordan. 12 guys are sent back each to grab a stone. That should bring a lot of pictures to mind. What are some of the pictures that comes to mind by bringing those 12 men, 1 from each tribe? I'm sorry, a spiritual? Absolutely. Absolutely. What else? Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Cherry. Is this a number we see repeat? Where? 12 apostles. I'm sorry? The 12 plagues? How many sons did Jacob have? 12. The original 12 spies. The 12 stones. You see these numbers just keep coming back time after time. And it's not good sometimes to be between my ears. But I think that we see this 12 continue to come back and come back and come back and culminate in the 12 apostles. And I think that's where the 12 apostles come from, is that number is to go back to designate the number of sons of Jacob, the number of original tribes. So they come back and they go back to where they've crossed the river now, and they build, what do they call it here? In verse 6, chapter 4, let this sign be among you, so your children ask later, what do these stones mean to you? And you shall say to them, because the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, when it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, so these stones shall become a memorial to the sons of Israel forever. And thus the sons of Israel did as Joshua commanded. Then the priests who carried the ark, that were standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything was completed, they came up out of the water, or out of the dry land, and when they had come back up off the banks, the waters again began to flow. One of the commentators I read, talked about that at this time of the year, the waters were actually up onto the banks. So this wasn't a dry season that could be explained away. This was near flooding type waters that were pulled back. And so when they were released, they came back to that same place. Did it? Well, it says up on the banks. Yeah. 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 Mine just says overflows all its banks in the days of the harvest. It doesn't talk about exactly I live right next to the uh-huh. Right. That's how mine reads also. I live right up against Jones Creek, and normally the water is only about that deep, just enough for an alligator here, there, a bunch of snakes, and a whole lot of turtles. And then you see the banks, and then it comes up into where you run the risk of flooding. So I guess it depends on how you look at that passage. If I look down at Jones Creek and I see that it's up over those banks, that's overflowing the banks, not necessarily flooding all of Baton Rouge like in 2016. So that's why I didn't necessarily interpret that as flooding everything. You just had high water that was higher than normal. And I think the point of that was that this was not a dry season that could be explained away with a drought, that this was the wet time of year, and this was God that did it. I think that's the purpose behind the language. I could be wrong, but I think that's the intent.
I think it further emphasizes the significance of America.
Absolutely.
Because you're not talking about a stream of water
Yeah.
that could have been blocked off, man-made dam back in this day and time, but rather a tremendous amount of water.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but if I read it right, I don't know if any of your commentators talked about it, but it would appear from what I'm reading that the area that the Israelites were walking in the riverbed was not mud and rock, but rather dry.
When they walked across, it specifically says they walked on dry land. Yeah. Yeah. Where if you're right, if it had just been a landslide that blocked it up, that ground would have been wet for days and days. Yeah. Yeah. And then the significance, I think, of it being pulled back 500 miles kind of caps everything off, too.
Also tells you at the end that as soon as they stepped out of the river, that all the water came back and was flooding the area again. If this was because of dry season, that water would suddenly disappear and then suddenly appear again.
What it talks about is the waters returned to the way they were prior, to short version of it. If you have water dammed up and you release that dam, what happens to that water? Yeah, and it's going to rush down with a vengeance, and that's not what's portrayed here. What's portrayed here is that the river returns to the way it was before. The same with the Red Sea. Yeah. Well, it's a nice completion and tie together, isn't it? God promises the Israelites the promised land when they exodus from Egypt. Through their sin, that generation doesn't get to see it. But as they leave Egypt, they pass through the Red Sea. And as they enter the promised land, they pass through the Jordan River that's pulled back in an identical manner. That should have been a real loud message to the Israelites, that this was God fulfilling his promises. Well, when you have the Egyptian army destroyed because the Red Sea comes back down on top of them, that had to have carried for years and years as they told their stories to their generations. Now, what's one of the other reasons Rahab would have known about the Red Sea? Look at her lineage. If you go to Matthew 1, where do you find Rahab? In the lineage of Christ, yes. Yeah. So she would have heard about it from multiple different ways along the years. So, yeah. So actually, Bobby and I had this conversation last week. Rahab is an interesting character, as is Abraham, in that we see so many passages in the scriptures that God cannot lie, that liars will not be saved, yet two of the key figures in this entire progression towards Christ lied on multiple occasions. Just kind of a little bit of irony. I guess it's another one of those things. Yes, sir.
The New Testament calls the crossing of the Red Sea akin to baptism. That's a cleansing. And so you see as they come out of Egypt, the nation is cleansed. Here you have the same situation where they go through the water and they're cleansed for the job that's ahead of them. And this generation had never seen that before. So you have this form of baptism that the New Testament Christians would have recognized. So would the Jews.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a cleansing of the nation.
Yeah. And in fact, that's what follows, isn't it? Is Joshua's command to the people to consecrate themselves as they come through this. So. Yeah. Yeah. Actually, it's a good segue. Is this consecration? Did I get my stuff out of line? No. Okay. I think I got my notes out of order. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about that consecration. All right. In chapter 5, we'll go ahead and read the first half of it and then come back to it. Now it came about when all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and the kings of the, not getting it. Just want to make sure I'm not getting ahead of myself here. Yeah, okay. It came about when all the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan to the west, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard how the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan before the sons of Israel until they crossed, that their hearts melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the sons of Israel. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, "Make for yourselves flint knives and circumcise again the sons of Israel the second time." So Joshua made himself flint knives and circumcised the sons of Israel at Gilbereth. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt who were males, all the men of war died in the wilderness along the way after they came out of Egypt. For all the people who came out were circumcised, but all the people who were born in the wilderness along the way had not been circumcised. So, for the sons of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness until all the nations, that is the men of war, came out of Egypt. And the voice of the Lord, to whom the Lord had sworn that he would not let them see the land which the Lord had sworn to their fathers to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Okay. No, that's... Yeah. Okay. So for whatever reason, as they were in the wilderness, this command that was given to Moses and the people early was not kept up with. I didn't take time to see if there were any commentators that got into that. Do you have any speculation on that, James? Moses was commanded to circumcise the people, and that stopped in the wilderness. I did not see anything that, of course, I did not spend a lot of time digging into that, but I did not see anything that was there, any reasoning behind that. We need to make sure it's not typical for us, huh? Yeah. I don't recall that, but is it? We just don't learn, do we? Yep.
Especially if we don't see an immediate benefit to something. You know, we'll go put a bowl in water, we know we're gonna catch fish, but, you're not gonna go drop a fishing line in the desert. Even if the guide sometimes tells you, go drop a line in the desert, and then he provides what you need.
If we pay attention, if we pay attention to these things, we begin to understand why it becomes so important that we do spend time with each other, doesn't it? Okay, in the opening class, we talked a little bit about this. I want to go back into this a little more as it becomes in context with the Battle of Jericho. Yeah, the consecration was definitely an important part of it, and I apologize for skipping over that because I do have it in my notes and I just skipped it. It ties back originally to Exodus 19, 14 and 15. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and consecrated the people. Okay, so this is when he's coming back down off the mountain after he visits the burning bush. They wash their garments. Be ready for the third day and do not go near a woman. So it came about on the third day when it was morning that there was thunder and lightning flashes. So this consecration was a very specific ritual that was to be done in order to prepare themselves for serving God. Now let's fast forward into 1 Corinthians 7:5, because we see it repeated. Let me back up and let's put it in context. Now concerning the things to which you wrote, it is good for a man not to touch a woman, but because of immoralities, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. Let the husband fulfill his duty to his wife, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does, and likewise also the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Stop depriving one another, except by agreement for a time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer and come together again, lest Satan tempt you because of your lack of self-control. This is a direct reference back to this same sanctification process. Okay? So it's interesting to see this carried all the way through, but Paul teaches, okay, you have this purpose, but don't let it get in the way. And, of course, what he's talking about is don't let it get in the way of the relationship between a husband and a wife. So it's, again, it's another one of these things that we see, if we take the time and study, we see it carried all the way through. If I remember right, I didn't go back and do a lot of redigging into this. If I remember right, there was a small group that would use this as an excuse to control, stay away, put enmity between them and their wives, and use the excuse of sanctifying themselves for God. And if I remember right, I think that was part of what was behind this. Am I close to that, Jim? Yeah. It's a long time since we did any of that study. But I want to say I remember something along those lines. Of course, Paul was dealing with a lot of issues with Corinth. So anyway, we have this process, and yes, Bobby, like you said, we start with the sanctification, we have the miracle, we come back through, and then we have the circumcision, the recommitment to God. Okay. So the people are settling in on the other side of Jordan. Clark supposes that Joshua had left to go out to reconnoiter the city himself, that he had been part of the 12 original spies. He had sent 2 more spies out and gotten that information back. He knew he was getting ready to go attack Jericho. And so the supposition is that the reason Joshua was out there is he was doing a little bit of his own homework. Looking at the city, I guess this would be a good time to throw this in. There was a couple commentators that said that based on archaeological evidence, that the city of Jericho was only about 18.5 acres. I thought that was interesting. Where's my math on that? I did some math on that. 18.5 acres based on 45,320 square feet per acre comes out to roughly 630 feet square, 640 feet square, if I remember right. So if you picture that, 640 feet would be taking 6 football fields stacked like that, essentially. 18.5 acres is not a lot of land. I don't know that I'm completely convinced that it was that small. Given what was talked about in terms of fortresses, the number of people that were in it, the picture that we have of Rahab's house being built on the double walls and hers not being the only house, when you start looking at that, and then others that said that the city could withstand a siege for a year, something as small as 18.5 acres doesn't, to me, fit. The excuse was that it would be easy for an army to walk around 18.5 acres in a day. It'd be easy for an army to walk around 3 times that in a day, too. 7 times would involve a miracle. But nonetheless, that was some of the reasoning behind that. The point, I guess, is that Joshua felt it was small enough that he could go out and get a picture of it to see how he was going to attack. Where his, being the military mind that he was, how he's going to approach this. So then he comes across this captain of the Lord's army. Okay. One of the suppositions is that Joshua thought that this was a soldier from Jericho coming out to do the same reconnoiter of the Israeli army. The depth of this interaction is really what makes it interesting. Let's start with the beginning of chapter 6. Now Jericho was tightly shut because of the sons of Israel. No one went out and no one came in. What had gone on that they would tighten this stuff up so much? I'm sorry? They found out about spies, but what else? What else? If you don't think that they didn't know that the Jordan River was pulled back and the Israelites walked across dry land? Absolutely. Absolutely. None of this was done behind closed doors. Yeah. 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 There won't be anything for them there. I really don't want to try to do this in 5 minutes. Let's cut it off here, and we'll pick it back up. Is there any other last comments? Okay. Bert, would you close?